This is the Leadership in Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now.
I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent.
When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation.
I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless.
Good morning and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm very lucky to have another returning guest, but I think you were on a panel last time, so we did a webinar, so it's not quite the same. So I'll get you all to myself this time, which is the way I like it. Good friend of mine and good friend of FinPro's is Caroline Taylor, who is now COO at Acies. And I'm hoping I said that right because I did double check it before we went on. Did I get it right?
You did. It's close enough.
Well, Caroline, before I kind of stumble into it, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and obviously the business that you're representing, because you've got a new hat on from when I last saw you.
Yeah. So when you last saw me, I was in Flock. Since July of last year, I have been in Acies as their COO. Acies is a MGU. For those people who don't really know the concept of MGU, the simplest way to understand it is it's like the closest intermediary to an insurer without actually paying the claims and having your own sort of big insurer balance sheet. Our strategy is to set up majority owned MGAs. So unlike some of the other MGUs out there, we will only subdelegate to the capacity that we get from our capacity partners to the majority owned MGAs that we are starting up. So we've got 3 under management at the moment, one in parametric cyber, one in construction, and one in SME property owners led. By the end of this year, we will have at least another 3 in a 5-year horizon. It will be 15 MGAs with a GWP of circa around 350 million. So benefit to me as the COO is my role is to launch them, grow them, scale them. And so I get to do a startup over and over and over again.
Yeah. Love that. Exciting. Yeah, I mean, it's very popular, isn't it? MGA, MGU models at the moment are well, not even at the moment, for a long time. I know I've just come from a meeting. I was just reflecting on that, and someone asked me about insurtech, and I know we're not talking necessarily about insurtech here. We're more talking about kind of new products, new businesses, and this model. I think it's been really interesting to see the kind of emergence of kind of this class of people that don't consider the MGA or MGU model something that is the only place you go when you can't get a job. It's now become exciting to work for one. You've been like in this model for a long time now. I think we realised that you and we actually realised before you worked at Flock, we'd spoken about 10 years before and didn't remember each other, which was really funny. But are you aware of that changing kind of attitude towards these type of models? Has it impacted the quality of the people that you see, for example, when you're looking at bringing new teams on to the business?
I think the market understands the value of it more than perhaps it used to. I think, going back, I've been in, the delegated space practically my entire career, even stemming from claims was, delegated claims. Oxygen Insurance Managers back in 2005 was the first MGA that I was in, which is now, obviously Penn, which is now, Penn Underwriting, which is huge. And I think, at that time back in, Oxygen, it was difficult to, persuade insurers to give you the pen and underwrite on their behalf. Because at that time, the mindset was, well, why do we need you? We get distribution from brokers directly, or we're dealing directly with customers. So what value, other than taking another sort of bite out of the ticket, what value do you bring? I think over time, from an insurer's perspective, they definitely see that MGAs and MGUs can generally move faster than they can and adapt to market conditions far quicker. When you think about the insurtech space and the startup space, the focus around technology is also another benefit. We don't have legacy systems. We are able to be more agile in that sense, and adapt to what needs to, adapt to customers' needs far quicker than the processes that the insurers have to go through just to do sort of some of the smallest changes. And also from a people perspective, there are people, we have we have quite a healthy pipeline of people that want to come into our business to start MGAs. So clearly there is still definitely a desire for certain individuals, particularly on the underwriting side, to come out of some of the the larger organizations and actually be masters of their own destiny, or spend the time doing the things they love, like sales, underwriting, distribution, and having an infrastructure around them that takes all of the other stuff away from them.
I think there's lots of attempts to do this, and I think that's always the promise. And I think the promise is not quite always delivered upon. And I think I started my career as an entrepreneur, and when I set up my kind of first business, we did loads of MGA business, and we were bringing teams to the table, and it was always, there's such a kind of spread of quality in terms of kind of the back office solution, or not the back office solution, but the support infrastructure that you need to kind of launch an MGU. What's kind of been the evolution of that to sort of today, where you think you can offer best in class? What does best in class kind of mean? And I know it's kind of doing that support, but what does it mean when we say digital underwriting? What do we kind of look for from a sort of tech angle perspective, or is it not as complicated as the tech? Is it just as good service? What do you think kind of makes the difference in kind of like choosing to partner with you versus maybe another business?
Well, I think that's one of the drivers for the MDs coming into the various MGAs that we are setting up at the moment is these are separate companies. So Acies, you've got these aren't trading names.
Yes.
So, and that's our business model currently. Whether or not that will change in the future, who knows? But because there's a lot of infrastructure needed in order to set up 15 companies and govern them. But these are majority-owned companies in which the people coming into those companies have a shareholding. And so my experience of, moving from the, your salary and your job title in the kind of big corporate world and going into insurtech, where, you have to consider giving up some of your salary because obviously it's a startup and there's no cash, and getting share options creates more of a mission-driven culture. So you're greater than just your salary or your own career path. You're the sum of all of its parts. And for some people that's quite motivating in terms of the ownership and the accountability, and they're building something that that's generating value for them outside of their own sort of personal salary or personal like ladder climbing. So I'd say that's one of the areas where it kind of changes the mindset. And I also think that it depends on which stakeholder you're talking about. So for example, if you're looking at working with brokers, so the service that we provide for our brokers, within the MGAs. So the MGU doesn't actually write any business directly; it's all done through the MGAs. Service is really important, and it is the simple things of making sure that the broker knows that they will get a response on a Friday afternoon, or it's not going to take 6 weeks or 3 weeks or even 5 days to get a response on a deal that they're looking to write. They can kind of trust us to turn something around, quickly when needed. And we also have for some of our MGAs, where it makes sense, we have a digital portal where the broker is able to quote and bind the policy themselves. But obviously if it hits certain markers, then that comes out as a referral. So we use technology to sort of augment our underwriters. And I think you use the term of like best in class, and personally I just feel like that's such a naff word, because what does that actually mean? I mean, the proof is in the pudding, and from the feedback that you get from the brokers that you're working with in terms of the service that you're providing them and the quality of the products that you're providing to them, and your willingness to sort of innovate to ensure that those products still continue to meet the demands and needs of their customers, and it's not just innovation for innovation's sake. I think it's important for our business to start with the problem that you're looking to solve. And that's something I learned from the insurtech world, rather than always heading out for a solution and then finding out that you've potentially put the wrong thing in, potentially spent a lot of money and put the wrong thing in place. And so that can be quite challenging to control when, within each MGA, you're essentially hiring entrepreneurs who are like trying to find the next thing that's going to like move the needle on their income or provide products for their customers. So that can be a challenge when you're sort of asking the questions around, okay, so where's the value in that for the business as a whole? Can we utilize that for other MGAs? Where's the benefit? What are the critical success factors? What does that look like in terms of, what does success look like? We could invest in the technology to create that product, but how do we know it's successful? And coming out of that world where there was people, although it was slow, people would like throw ideas out there, and maybe some would stick. Often stuff gets built and then the actual success of it isn't necessarily monitored. And I think if you always start with technology and think, okay, well, we'll just use technology to make us more efficient, or become a digital underwriter, I don't think you're necessarily getting to the root of the issues within the industry that for customers and brokers that you need to solve.
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, we talk about, I must have the conversation about what does insurtech mean about 5 times a week, I think. 9 times out of 10 when I'm talking to clients, go, we're an insurtech focused search firm. What I really mean is that we work with innovative businesses, and so sometimes that's I just came from a meeting with a very traditional independent insurance broker from Asia, and they just look at the world a different way. So they're brave in their hiring, so they bring non-traditional hires into the businesses where they can. So in operational roles, they might have someone that's never worked in insurance before, because they might have someone looking at a technology stack and saying, do you know what, some of this technology isn't any good, so we're going to go and find technology that is good and use it. And the one example I'd use is like, they were looking at what was the response from underwriters for submissions they made. They got no way of tracking if anyone had looked at it. But then something as simple as like PandaDocs, which like loads of businesses use, you can send PandaDocs out and I can see who's looked at it, when they've looked at it, how long they've looked at it, what section of that document they've looked at. And you think, well, why haven't you got that as a broker? Like, why wouldn't you have that information when I've got it as a search consultant? That's it might sound a bit creepy, but it's good to know. When your underwriter says, oh, I've looked at this, it's like, well, you haven't. And I know you haven't. So let's not waste time. I mean, that tells you not to waste your time there. So, but you're right, because the business of insurance is not broken. There is a reason why the big insurers continue to be successful. Firstly, you can't, innovation at scale for some of those businesses almost is impossible. But even in smaller businesses, does it matter? Not if you're being efficient. If your technology is there to make you be more efficient, but if you're being efficient, you can do it with people and more people and using not very sexy technology sometimes, and just kind of setting up good processes and procedures. And it seems to me that the businesses that focus too much on the tech get a little bit lost there, and that doesn't drive the results people want.
And
So
one of the things I learned in, in the last role I was in is like, sometimes you do have to start with a manual process. We all have a spreadsheet in the insurance industry, and
yeah,
if you were to build the rating model or the process just based on how you think it should work, the likelihood is you're going to make mistakes along the way. So sometimes it is good to really start with a spreadsheet or a manual process if you know that the volume isn't going to be to the extent that everybody's going to fall over, to actually figure out what it is you need. I mean, I've come into Acies after it's been around for sort of 3 years now. So, the first MGA onboarded had all of the pain of, building the first version of the underwriting platform. Now, it's not our proprietary system. It's not our tech. We've partnered with a third party. But what it does mean is when we do say to the underwriters or, subject matter experts from the underwriting side coming into the business, about the technology, it's like, yes, we've got a core underwriting platform, but your question sets and your workflow is going to look very different SME to international medical malpractice. So now we have the core platform. The rest is just configuration, but that configuration can be done quite easily and is quite personal to that particular class of business. So we're not really trying to put a square peg in a round hole, which is what you often get with some of those bigger platforms.
Mm. What's the something that's always interested me when working with MGAs is how opportunistic they are. And I'm mixed about whether I think it's a good thing or a bad thing. Because from my perspective, I was always like, why not approach this like a researcher's over it? These are the lines of business we're interested in, and let's go and find the best teams in them to build MGAs, which I think is the way I would want to do it. But then I'm biased towards that because that's how I would do it. That's how my role would allow me to do it. But what's the kind of theme of appetite for the business? Are there specific lines you're going after, and then you're proactively looking to find teams? Are you just reviewing submissions as they come in, but they have to fit a set criteria, and it's more like almost like an investment, a VC fund? What's the way that you're sort of thinking about scaling and growing?
So it's twofold. I mean, historically, we have been very reactive, which has been fine. It's served us absolutely well in terms of, writers and other distributors coming to us to talk to us about, their product and their idea and their views and their business plans. But I do think that as we grow, we could be a little bit more deliberate around areas we want to go into. So there's lots of reports that get published at the end of the year, at the start of the year, particularly around, what's happening in the reinsurance markets. And that's always a good place to look for potential opportunities for growth areas. And actually starting to do a bit of horizon scanning in relation to where those opportunities are, and then working with partners to help us find the right teams to launch those products. We do know that, across our our current portfolio and the 3 that we know that we are going to launch by the end of the year, there are complementary products that would work well around cyber and PI, for example. So there is an opportunity. So we know before the end of the year we'll have a PI and a cyber team. We happen to be talking to people already in that space. The proof will be in the pudding around, does the business plan stack up? Do we think we can get capacity? Because before we will sort of do the first step of, typically before we actually onboard somebody, we would generally like to know that we've got capacity lined up, because it's quite a big risk to take if you don't. They have to be able to get to 25 million GWP within a 5-year horizon. They can make a loss in the first year. They have to be able to break even in year 2, and year 3 they have to be profitable. So we want to be able to see that and really kick the tires in terms of those business plans. So in answer to your question, it's not quite that easy to say it's one way or the other. But at the moment, it is. There is a lot of opportunity out there. We have very strict kind of evaluation process, which will need to be, further as we grow this year. It will need to be codified into a bit more of a process than sort of fly by your seat of pants that we've currently been doing so far, to get things, to get our MGAs on board. We're going for a fundraise at the moment, which is due to close shortly. It's not VC or PE. It's a family office. So, we will still be a very much, owner, privately owned business. So still masters of our own destiny. But we will have another seat at the table where, we have to deliver on the plans that we've put in front of them as part of the fundraise. And if one of those MGAs that we've said that we anticipate launching this year to create revenue, it doesn't happen for whatever reason, then we have to kind of fit that with something else. And what we could find at that point is that actually we still think that a particular class of business is the right direction based on the evaluation that we've done. Right, let's go find a team that can fill that gap for us, rather than starting from complete scratch, which is like, okay, so what product are we going to find out of the funnel that's going to fill that gap?
Sure. No, makes sense. No, makes sense. I want to talk about you a little bit more distinctly. That's one of the things that I've kind of always been fascinated about with your career is you've spanned insurers, solicitors, broking, MGAs, and you made this leap into insurtech. And why was that something that you were interested in? Did you think about it through that lens at all, or did you just think this is just an interesting opportunity in my skill set? How conscious was that? Right, I want to go and work in the insurtech community.
So it wasn't a conscious, and every job I've done has been like either an accident or pretty organic. I've sort of found myself in that place and then realized, oh, this is this thing called insurtech. So with insurtech, the first one was risk. And when I went to speak to Niall Barton, or Nigel as he was known at the time, I was talking to him about my intention was to talk to him about how we might be able to collaborate on some products that I wanted to launch in SEIB. It was only when he showed me what they'd planned to build out in their original product, which was Stay, Move, Go on the app. I just basically said, I think I'd like you to employ me, based on what I'd seen. I didn't think, oh, I want to work in insurtech. I knew from what all of I was out in a lot of conferences talking about insurtech and technology, but I hadn't made a conscious decision that I wanted to be in insurtech. But after I saw what they were building, I was very excited. I was very excited about it, and I knew that my skill set would add value to their business. And it was a similar thing. It was a similar thing when I moved from Risk to Flock. They were looking to pivot, or not pivot, but launch a new vertical in commercial motor. They wanted to get themselves directly authorized by the FCA. Their leadership team was very limited in its insurance experience, so I knew I could add a lot of value to that business, and also I knew that I would be getting value in return. So when I look at employment, for me, it's always like a value exchange. So all the while you're equal in terms of what the growth you're getting out of. It's not about money, right? So it's like all the while I'm getting the growth out of the organization that I feel that I need. Being neurodivergent, my brain is constantly striving for new information and likes to keep busy. All the while that I'm delivering on the things that that they need me to do, and I'm adding value to that business. It's like everybody's on the happy path, right? It's only when that value exchange shifts in whatever direction someone starts to get unhappy, and other things then start to become more important, and you get driven towards something else. So I think for me, arriving in insurtech was an accident and not an intentional thing. But being in businesses, that what I've learned about myself coming out of Flock and having, 4 months off before I started at Acies, it enabled me to kind of figure out what it is I really enjoy doing. And BAU is not me. I'm just not. I'm that BAU girl. You just need somebody else is probably going to do that better than me. But if you're building something, changing something, restructuring something, then that's really does suit my skill set. And that just happens to be in either it has to be done in a startup environment or in a larger organization that's got a considerable amount of change. I think in larger organizations, for me, the concern I always have is like, how much can I actually influence? Whereas in smaller organizations that are growing from the ground up, you have more opportunity to influence the direction of travel.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I'm singing from exactly my hymn sheet. I mean, that's why I started working with venture-backed businesses. I want to work with entrepreneurs. I want my work to be meaningful, and I think on average, our average client is probably less than 200 staff. In fact, it's probably less than our average client's probably less than 100 staff. So
Yeah,
every hire you make is significant. Whereas putting the fifth person down at a multinational with 10,000 staff is just it doesn't really shift the needle. I mean, I'm sure we're good at what we do and we always provide good talent, but it doesn't really do anything for my immediate kind of doesn't do anything for me. Selfishly, I've said this several times. I mean, the business is a reflection of the work that I want to do, and it's more meaningful. Because I was going to ask you that. You've gone from an insurtech, but it's a startup, and previously another startup, and then you're in this world of like, you're starting startups. Is essentially your role. And you've answered it there, but what is it particularly about being this close to the inception of businesses that you find so rewarding? Or why are you a glutton for punishment, Caroline? What's going on?
so let's talk about my childhood or something.
Yeah, that's probably the same for me.
I don't know. I couldn't see I think once I came out of when I went into risk, and I'd been there a very short space of time, I couldn't see myself ever going back to the corporate world.
Mm.
I think you have to be a certain type of person, and that's no judgment, because it's horses for courses, right? And for people who I was interviewing at Flock, and if any of them listen to the podcast, they'll remember this analogy. But I would use an analogy of like a leaking tap. So you're in the office, and there is a tap in your office, and it's leaking, and you walk past the tap, and do you just walk past the tap and just assume, oh, that's not my job, somebody else has got to do that, because there's somebody else, there's a gazillion other people that the tap fixes? Or do you stop and go, oh, that tap's broken, oh, I wonder how to fix that tap then? Okay, well, I'm going to give it a go and see if I can fix it, and then if I can't fix it, I might ask for some help.
Yeah.
So if you're the person that's going to take the lead and say, I'm going to try and figure out how to fix that tap, then you belong in a startup world. But if you're the sort of person that's going to walk past the tap and you think it's going to be somebody else's problem to solve, then you're probably more suited in a big corporate organization. So for me personally, knowing more about myself now than I probably ever did prior to coming out of Flock, I like to build things. And when I think about me as a kid, I played with a lot of Legos. I used to take stuff apart and put it back together rather than play with. My mum would say I would take my toys apart and put them back together more so than actually play with them. And so there's something in my characteristic that I didn't know, or in my character that I didn't know existed, that just lends itself to being there from the beginning, so that I can use my spatial thinking as a dyslexic to, be able to see all of the parts of the business together in one sort of map in my brain, and understand how they're all interconnected and how the actions of any one part of it impacts the other. And you can't do that if you're in a large organization in a functional silo. And I think working in functional silos just won't suit the the way my brain works.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we did this before we hit record. Actually, we've sort of I was, for the benefit of the listeners, I was terrifying Caroline because I said, "Oh, I'm not going to just ask those questions." And I'm sure you won't mind me sharing. You were going, "I'm neurodivergent, and don't do that to me. I've got these questions." And then the funny thing is, I'm exactly the same. And you know, I said I've ADHD and OCD it's been my diagnosis, and you know, I'm sort of I struggle to plan too far in the future, and people always think it's going to be me just having a super tiny desk, but that's not how it does it. I'm obsessive about stuff, and you know, I'd walk past that leaky tap, and if I didn't fix it, I'd be thinking about it like 6 weeks later,
Yes.
and so I think it helps me to a certain extent. I think a lot of it helps. You know, I obsess about searches that I'm working on, and there's a way of me coping with that. And I did one on my mental health, and I was going to ask you about that. You know, you and I have sort of really sort of got to know each other better, really, having sort of met a few times on a initiative about DE&I. And I probably wanted to move the conversation onto that, really. Like, how supportive, particularly in things like neurodivergence, do you think businesses are? Particularly like bigger businesses. Well, maybe I shouldn't answer. I mean, it's just bigger businesses because I kind of therefore I'm asserting that smaller businesses are better at it. I just think smaller startup businesses tend to be more accepting of different individuals because it is a sort of little gang when you start, and you have to have that mentality. So you kind of almost have to look out for each other. But I might be wrong there. But do you think on that kind of journey, the industry is getting better at accommodating people who might think in a different way, or do you think there's not been enough change?
I mean, I don't think I've necessarily seen it. I mean, I talk about my neurodivergence a lot so that people actually understand why I might behave in a certain way, or why 1 minute I might be completely hyper focused on something, and then the next I'm completely distracted and procrastinating over, you know, over everything, and write a lot of lists. And from people I talk to in organizations and contacts of mine, it's typically down to the experience that I hear and the experience that, you know, that I've had personally. It's generally down to you as the neurodivergent to figure out how you fit and how you work best in the environment that you're in, not necessarily the business making adaptations for you. So I do think we still have, as an industry, we do have a long way to go. You're right, in like the smaller worlds, you know, within Acies, you know, I report to the CEO, and he's very keen to understand like how to work, how to get the best out of me through, you know, with my, you know, and understand my neurodivergence and the neurodivergence of others. But typically most people don't even talk about that they've got it. They've just masked and found strategies and ways in which to cope. And I think some people I talk to, you know, they're not even willing to talk to say that they are neurodivergent because they're worried that they might get treated or perceived to be treated differently, but not in a positive way. And that might just be how they're feeling about it and their own sort of insecurities about it. I think the hardest part is actually saying it for the first time, and then after that, it's just for me, it's like the floodgates are open. But I'm quite an open person in that, you know, in that respect. I mean, the whole sort of DEI, you know, the DEI topic is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm involved in a number of groups and networks that, you know, specifically focus on women. But I think there's an untapped piece which is around sort of social diversity. And you were talking about sort of, you know, at the top of this about social mobility. It's like, if I think about myself as a 16-year-old, when I left school with very little in the way of qualifications, I think my highest GCSE is like an E, and that's not in math and English. My dad was a functioning alcoholic, and there was domestic violence was a weekly occurrence in my house. And from that, you know, in coming in, if that was me coming into the insurance industry today, because I was low level educated, didn't really have the grades, I wouldn't get a job in the insurance industry. We're making it so difficult to get that diversity, and the chances are the people that we are not giving space to, unless you've got like, you know, unless you've got one of the neurodivergence that makes you really good at maths and you're an actuary and you've done really well in your exam, you know, your exams. And that's no offense to actuaries, I'm sure they're not all neurodivergent. But you're kind of limiting yourself in terms of the people that you're able to hire. And it's not now. I mean, I remember, you know, many years ago, you know, the whole subject of graduates. I mean, I've been in the industry for 25 years, so, or over 25 years now. So I've seen like the narrative change, you know, from hiring school leavers to hiring graduates. Now it's not just graduates. It's like you have to have a 2-1, and not just a 2-1, it has to be from a certain university. And then you have an assessment center, and somebody sent me an assessment center document that a pre-read that they've been sent before they were going to go into an assessment center with an insurer that I know I won't name them. And I was looking at it, I was thinking, I don't actually know anybody in the industry that would be able to do this assessment. What are we trying to achieve here?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I'm really passionate about. You know, I did go to university and I messed my degree up, and I've talked about that really openly, and you know, and I wouldn't. I'm in an industry which probably even my industry's started to go down the route, because it's like lazy. It's like a lazy method of attracting talent. I'm scared to open this topic up because we need to bring it to a close. So I'm just going to conclude with, you know, I think I echo that, and I think the opportunity in small independent businesses, and I think that's the opportunity that I really support, is to just be a bit braver, be braver in your hiring, you know, particularly at entry level, because someone coming to degree, there's an evidence of some level of like intellect and ability to learn, right? That's basically what degree demonstrates. It doesn't really demonstrate any more than that. And you're coming into an industry where it's completely alien to them. It's a completely different language. It's a completely different culture. You can onboard that to someone who's not got a degree, and you should try, because we can't say we're doing enough about social mobility if we're not, because inherently it's too expensive to go to university. If I was going to university today, my parents could not have afforded to send me. This is absolutely no chance. So
Yeah.
I would have gone, and I got my first job on the basis I had a degree. Now I got it before my qualification came out because I knew I'd forced it up. So I purposely was like, oh yeah, probably going to get a 2-1, and my academics up to that day probably back that up. But I wouldn't be sitting here having worked in the roles I've worked in, because I wouldn't have been able to do it. So yeah, I'm really passionate about it, and I think it's important that people take that message on board.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would say is that I'm doing a piece of work for Acies. I agreed with the group CEO that I do set out a paper, because, you know, I'm looking around our business, and like women are less likely to start up their own business. Men are more likely to do that. So if you're looking at setting up 15, if we're looking at setting up 15 MGAs, for example, the likelihood is most of those are going to be run by men. So how do we change that? How do we promote Acies as a place in which, you know, women could start their own MGAs, because it's low risk. They haven't got to find the capital. They've not necessarily got to take a massive pay cut. We're small enough, and will continue to be family friendly and family orientated. You know, there are options there. And I was looking at so I've been looking at some like statistics, and my characteristics aren't stat based, but like I found something on the Office of National Statistics, which said that basically that if you've had free school meals, which was something I had when I was at school, you're far less likely you're going to earn much less than somebody who that hasn't, and significantly less, and you're far less likely to reach your potential because you don't have the connections that somebody else who isn't from a sort of socially socially impacted background has had.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I saw some funny statistics on the same thing. But I'm going to end on a positive note because it's
Yes.
nice to see people like yourself, like, you've always been really vocal about this. You're in a position of influence. You're in a COO role in a business who's going to start multiple businesses, and to hear that you're doing something about it it's incredibly good for me to hear, because one of the things that I launched We're Insurtech Women with my colleague Sophie, because
Yeah.
we were very, very conscious that we were going out to meet all these entrepreneurs and invested businesses, and they were all men, and we were going, here we go again. It's this opportunity to grow a new kind of like new world in insurance, and we weren't taking it. So yeah, you'll always hear me clapping loudly from the sidelines. So um, Caroline, you stepped in at last minute as well, so thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast, and it's nice to spend time with you independently this time and not be on a webinar. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been fun as always.
Thank you.